Now, it's a vexatious story, vaccination, these days, though I'm not entirely sure why. Almost all of us have been vaccinated as children against all of the diseases that used to lay us waste. I get the point that the COVID vaccine is experimental in the sense it has not gone through the long period of trialing that other vaccines have done, but it could scarcely be so because the world faced an emergency that at the time looked as if it might become the Black Plague, which I remind you, wiped out a third of the population of this country. A third. At today's population equivalent, that would have been in excess of 20 million people dead. Now, it didn't turn out that way, but the drive for a vaccination and the rollout of the vaccination is probably the only two good things that we did in our handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've had the jabs twice, and I'll have the booster when it comes along. I figure that it quite obviously is not going to stop you getting COVID, but has a fair chance of stopping you dying from it, and that'll do me. But equally, I'm entirely opposed to compulsory vaccination. I'm entirely opposed to COVID passports, which it seems this day that the Boris Johnson government is now retreating from, leaving, as oftentimes, the Scottish government of Nicola Sturgeon up the creek without a paddle. She is going ahead with COVID passports, and she was doing so on the assumption that Boris Johnson was going to implement them here in England. So I don't know how she'll handle that. I'm against it. I'm against it for all kinds of reasons. It is a kind of apartheid that they have in mind. I have no idea if the eminent physician, Dr Bob Gill, a man who's done more to campaign to save the health service in Britain than any other person. He's one of my heroes. He is a GP, although God knows how he fits it all in, because you'll find him on the campaign trail almost perpetually, fighting for the health of our people and the health service which underpins it. And I'm glad to say he joins us now. Dr. Bob, thank you for joining us on board the mother of all talk shows. I gave you my position on the vaccines. What's yours?
Hi, Joe. Thank you for inviting me on. I agree with your points about avoiding compulsion. I think that's not a direction we should be going in healthcare in this country. Vaccine passports may seem appealing to some, but the worry is this is a thin edge of the wedge. It might be a a device for entry into accessing healthcare in general, and it's a very divisive step. And what function does it serve? Because if you've been vaccinated, you can still get infected and you can still transmit the virus. So there's no logical reason that a passport means that you can't be spreading the virus. So it's a flawed idea, and it might lead elsewhere, which we don't want to go as a nation. But in terms of vaccine apartheid, well, in the last few days, Professor Sarah Gilbert of the AstraZeneca Oxford team cast doubt on the need for a booster vaccine, certainly for a large proportion of the population in this country, because the work they've done with their trial patients is that after a year of being vaccinated, they found the level of protection by the two vaccines that people have already had is still relatively high. So the case to have a third booster is weak for the general population. There is an exception, of course, those highly vulnerable people with a defective immune system, and that's about 500,000 people in the UK. But for everybody else, the case is not being made strongly that a booster would be that helpful.
But it wouldn't be harmful, would it?
Well, it wouldn't be harmful, but we live in a world where, for example, in Africa, the percentage of population vaccinated is around 2%. And as you said earlier, over 80% of this country's adults over the age of 16 have been vaccinated. So where would that vaccine do the most good? And we all realize that, this is a global pandemic. Variants can arise in unvaccinated populations. The more we let this fire continue to burn in other countries, then the risk of a new variant developing, which is vaccine resistant, coming back to bite us in the bottom, is still there. And we have to weigh up that risk against the benefit, the small marginal benefit that a third booster jab would give us here.
Why do you think the Tories have U-turned on this? It seemed as if Boris Johnson was going for the vaccine passport, and it seems from the Health Secretary's comments in the papers today that they're backing off. Why?
I suspect there may be pressure amongst the sort of libertarian wing of the Tory party to avoid going down this road. Maybe they've seen the protests in France and across other European countries against the idea of a vaccine passport. So, they don't want to fight on multiple fronts. I don't think the agenda of getting some sort of person identification, whether it be on the back of vaccination or some other ruse, that will pop up again, I'm pretty sure. But at the moment, they've decided to duck the issue.
The travel issues, I haven't yet tried. Looks nightmarish to me. But if I was to decide to take the Channel Tunnel tomorrow, how do I prove that I've had the double vaccination?
Well, there is a facility for you to print off your vaccination status. So that avoids an electronic, complicated process. The fear that people have with the electronic vaccine passport is what are the data
Have we lost Bob?
can be transferred to foreign governments and foreign...
Yeah, Bob, repeat that answer because we lost you momentarily.
So there is an NHS site you can go to and print off the fact that you've had the vaccination so that you can present that as evidence, and there's no problem with that. Despite being vaccinated, you could still transmit the virus, so you need to do lateral flow tests, although they're unreliable, but they're required before travel. And it's still very complicated. And Sajid Javid, Health Secretary today, is hoping to drop the requirement for the PCR test for travellers returning to the UK. But that is also not a very scientific thing to do because the lateral flow test is unreliable and the PCR is the gold standard test.
You're the expert. I bow to your superior knowledge, but I'm getting the sense, although I believe entirely in the vaccine, I urge everyone to have it, it has not provided the level of protection that perhaps people thought it was going to. I was in a cab today. The man, like me, had been double vaccinated. He wasn't that younger than me, so he was an older man, but quite fit. And he got COVID, and it nearly killed him. He was 10 days flat out. He collapsed in the street and so on. Am I right in saying that most of us thought that the vaccine would provide more protection than it actually has?
I think the public generally in this country have a great faith in vaccination programs in general. The problem with the coronavirus vaccine is that although it gives you protection, it's not complete, you are still susceptible to get the infection. But we do know that if you've been double vaccinated and you get coronavirus, the chances of you becoming seriously ill, requiring admission to intensive care unit and potentially dying are dramatically reduced. So it's not perfect, but it's the best thing we have.
It's the best thing we have, and it's a no-brainer when you put it like that. It's bad. He said to me, please don't get it. Well, of course, I'm not in control of that. I might catch the coronavirus, but however bad his was or mine would be, he didn't die of it, and he's back at work. 80%, you say, Bob,
That's
in
right.
Britain. 2%. 2% in some of the poorest countries. Why is that? Is there a shortage of the serum, or just a shortage of money in poor countries to pay for it?
There are several factors. At the beginning, the drug companies refused to remove their patent on these vaccines, so that limited the production. Certainly production in other countries wasn't ramped up. So there was almost like a protection racket in progress. Now, Western countries have bought up the capacity, most of the world capacity for producing the vaccine, and there's accusations of vaccine hoarding in terms of utilizing future capacity and production. Now, there are moves, some powerful voices saying we need to remove the patent protection, we need to boost production overseas, and we need to strongly consider the opportunity cost of providing a booster here, as opposed to giving a first vaccine in countries like Africa. The first vaccine provides a lot of protection over and above the small additional protection that a third booster might provide in the richer countries. So that is the balance that people have to make.
In a sane and rational world, that would be a dichotomy that would be worth making a decision on. But how to put it? It's a false dichotomy, because if they don't give it to me, they're not going to give it to a poor country that can't pay for it instead, are they?
Well, that is the problem, although the WHO did set up a system where the rich countries could subsidize vaccination for the poor countries. But, the rich countries, the US, the UK, were major obstacles for the removal of the patent. So they drove up the cost themselves. And you have to wonder whose interests are the government serving. Is it big pharma, or is it control of the pandemic on an international basis? And I'm afraid they've towed the line for big pharma.
Doctor, you're an officer and a gentleman. Thank you very much for joining us.